what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Well, thanks to the city.
Every hour, feel the power. Feel the power. To
I want to get a picture of this too. You gave me a good idea.
Assembly Bill 1645 will seek to eliminate the use of the highly toxic hydrofluoric acid by all California refineries. Assembly Bill 1646 will require all California refineries to develop a more effective community alert system. Assembly Bill 1647 will require California refineries to install real-time air quality monitors and provide the community with real-time data. Assembly Bill 1648 will increase the number of state refinery safety inspectors. And Assembly Bill 1649 will permanently establish a state task force on refinery safety. Each one of these bills is designed to make our refineries safer. But each one of these bills is likely to be opposed strongly by powerful oil lobbyists. That is why I am asking for your help. We're going to need the community's strong support to fight the oil lobbyists and pass these bills.
When the explosion happened 2 years ago, my family and I, we just lived a couple miles away from the refinery. And so since then there's been a growing concern about the refinery safety. There's been a series of accidents, there's a series of bad news, a series of flares coming out of the refinery. And so, you know, the refinery is a big part of our local economy. It's a huge source of good union jobs, and we want to keep it that way. But we just want to make the refinery safer for our families, for our communities, and for the refinery workers.
What is MHF and why is it changing?
Modified hydrofluoric acid is a highly toxic chemical that the refinery uses to basically produce gasoline. There are only 2 refineries in the entire state of California that use this highly toxic chemical, hydrofluoric acid. Here at Torrance, they use a modified form, but there is still a lot of concerns about how safe it is.
What you're saying seems pretty reasonable. Who is opposed to this?
The oil lobbyists are already making the rounds in Sacramento to oppose my bills.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Gangman Eng. I've worked for 35 years or more, as I still do, part-time as a rocket scientist in the national security space industry. I'm a physicist by trade. I have a PhD in physics. And I ran for city council last year on a Make the Refinery Safer, reducing the HF risk platform. And one of the things that came out, and a lot of this is due to Sally Hayati, who first found it out, the president of TRAA, that every time you have a very large risk, the EPA requires companies to do what's called an off-site consequence analysis, OCA, and register it with the EPA. And so the Exxon refinery said, well, we think in 10 minutes we might release 5,200 pounds of HF, and so they estimated that it would cause 255,000 injuries. They're not required to do deaths, just injuries. Other independent estimates have estimated at least 20,000 deaths if you have that many injuries. Sal Hayati also looked at the other HF refinery, the one run by Valero in Wilmington. Now the EPA requires the worst case assessment to say what will happen if you assume everything comes out in 10 minutes. No matter how fast it really will come out, assume it all comes out in 10 minutes. So what she found out is Valero assumed, as everybody else does, that the entire tank would evacuate in 10 minutes because that's the requirements of the EPA. Even if it would really take 20, in order to put everything on equal footing, the EPA says assume everything comes out in 10 minutes, and their radius of death is much larger. It's like 13 miles. So Saleh Hayati dug up the difference between the Valero risk assessment and the ExxonMobil risk assessment and asked how come Valero's radius of death is much larger than the 3.2 mile radius for 5,200 pounds. And although we've never gotten a straight answer from ExxonMobil, I suspect what they assumed is that after 10 minutes, they would have other safety measures activated, like finding a place to dump the stuff into an underground tank, etc., etc. So that's why they instead put only a 5,200 pound release as their worst case risk. But if their empty the tank failed, it would then be much greater. So it's how different companies have interpreted the EPA rules, and you get different answers. But the whole point is, even at that low level, it is far, far too dangerous. The ExxonMobil, and I'm sure PBF, would stand by the assessment that they said, well, we were here first. And that's true, that they've been a refinery here at the site long before it was developed for single-family homes. However, a lot of these homes were built in the 50s, and Mobil Refinery back then converted to the more profitable HF only in 1965 or 66. So that was after all the homes were built. So we were here first before they brought HF to us. Time to get rid of it. Actually, the on site, there's one tank. One of these settler tanks has 50,000 pounds of HF in it. And it's our understanding there are 5 such tanks for a total of 250,000 pounds of HF, modified HF on site. And their risk assessment, which could injure 255,000 people by their own off-site consequence analysis, was only for a 5,200 pound release, which is about 1/10 of one tank. So the risk could be far greater than their actual, what's even recorded, and that risk already is too great.
Talk to me about the MHF. What is MHF?
Okay, what happened is under the consent decree with Torrance, they were supposed to try to make HF show that it was as safe as sulfuric acid, the other alternative. Mm-hmm. And so they started a research project to add stuff to the HF and another liquid to the HF in order to reduce its vapor pressure. And so they came up with what they called modified HF, which has a lower vapor pressure when you add a certain percentage of chemicals, and they have a patent on it, so they call it proprietary. So they never have to disclose exactly what's in the particular modified HF that they use, but Saleh Hayati again found some of the patents, and I looked them up too. Their preferred embodiment in their patent is to use a chemical called sulfolane, S-U-L-F-O-L-A-N-E, and it's a very good solvent. And so they put certain percentages of sulfolane in, and it reduces the vapor pressure of the hydrogen fluoride coming out. Now you might think that that's a very mysterious thing, but actually isn't, because hydrogen fluoride, when you mix it with water, becomes hydrofluoric acid, and the water actually breaks up the HF and surrounds each H and F, and so it lowers the vapor pressure too. Water is a very effective modifier of HF vapor pressure, but it's so chemically reactive that it renders it useless for refinery work. So they need something that's not quite as aggressive in reducing the vapor pressure of HF solutions. So they use sulfolane. And they, original consent decree, they did research on the fly to patent this in the 90s. And their original thing said 50% sulfolane will reduce the risk of HF vaporization by more than a factor of 2, which means it just takes twice as long to kill us, but that was okay. And they then finally in the consent decree agreed to use 30% modified HF, 30% modifier, 70% HF. And then they found out it didn't work so well in their refinery. So Leroy Jackson, our manager of the city of Torrance, agreed with the refinery when they wanted to reduce the 30% down to 10%. All the paperwork for that has been very hard to find, but the city has admitted that in some closed session they eventually or priorly or whatever got some agreement to rubber stamp the change from 30% to 10%. And so at the 10% level, it basically is, 90% HF. It vaporizes, 90% as well as HF. So 90% of death is a lot of death. So that was the whole point Saleh Hayati and TRAA have been making, and I agree 100%, that it's now such a small difference from HF that it's really HF. And I think that's why TRAA and citizens groups and lots of people have now encouraged the AQMD to actually try to redo a new Rule 1410. They almost banned HF and MHF in the 1990s, and it got thrown out of court on a legal technicality, I understand. I haven't read the court order, but it's really sad to put 250,000 people's life and health at risk on a court technicality. So I'm really pleased with the new Sheila Kuehl now on the AQMD. She said to the Daily Breeze that she wants the AQMD to be more proactive. So soon after that, they've announced very recently that they want to try to put up a new Rule 1410 to ban HF, MHF, and that's why I put out a sign that says, support the AQMD HF MHF ban. This is what we need. We need citizens groups' help, and but there's only so much citizen groups can do. We're glad to have our representatives like Al Marasucci propose legislation in the state legislature, and we're glad to have our regulatory agencies like the AQMD get on board, and hopefully, the risk is far too great for this. One of the things that I've also, when our mayor, Pat Fury, said there's nothing we can do, I sent some suggestions to the city council, 7 of them, and one of them is to issue a proclamation supporting the eventual disappearance of HF at the refinery. That would cost them nothing. But the other thing is I suggested that the city of Torrance require a surety bond. Surety bond's different than life insurance. We all expect to die eventually, hopefully not an HF death. But a surety bond is for rare events. And if they required the refinery to post $1 million surety bond for every 250 pounds of HF on site, that would be a good start, which of course would be $1 billion surety bond for 250,000 pounds, which would encourage them to reduce their HF on site. But the nice thing about that also, instead of just taking their word that the risk is low, it would force them to go out into the open marketplace and have independent insurers really evaluate what the risk of another near catastrophe or catastrophe, and then they would just pay the insurance company for the acceptable risk, and if something happened, we'd at least have $1 billion of extra health care, hopefully if the thing weren't a full catastrophe, to help our residents, the people who are affected. So there are a lot of things that can be done, and I'm hoping the simple solution is to get rid of this stuff, because it's inappropriate for the densely populated places like we have. We're the only 2, us and Wilmington, that have HF in California.